Hey guys, Dan, Warpaint JKU. Let's talk about roll cages. Alright, so as you guys can tell, here I am back in the garage, standing in front of Warpaint. And Warpaint, if you haven't noticed on any of the Instagram stuff or any of the YouTube stuff, I have a roll cage. Now, the roll cage that I went with is going to be a bolt-in style roll cage, not the typical traditional super strong weld-in style cages, but this cage is pretty strong. Let's check it out. The reason I went with the bolt-in style was basically a financial situation, okay? I had just gotten done ton swapping my rig, beadlocks, 40s, the whole deal. And as you guys know, that can be kind of expensive, especially even if you're doing it yourself, okay? Especially if you pay a shop. Now, I did it myself. It wasn't quite as bad as if I had decided to pay a shop. It was actually a lot better off, and we've talked about that in other videos. So I went with a bolt-in style roll cage. I wanted some more safety than the traditional roll bar style cage that comes in a Jeep from the factory provides, but I didn't want to spend the money on a bolt-in or a weld-in cage right away. I fully intended on this cage being a temporary setup, temporary situation, eventually removing it and swapping it out for a full weld-in style cage. However, upon my research, I found something out that was pretty cool. Now, I've talked in other videos about building on a budget and building on a normal person's budget without all the sponsorships and that kind of thing. And there's two very popular cages out there that are bolt-in style cages. And people tend to go with one versus the other because it's more American made, which I am all for. But at the same time, if I'm actually putting one in my vehicle, if it's a safety component and I'm relying on it for the safety aspect, I have a couple of questions about the steel that they use. I want to know what kind it is. I want to know how thick it is. Those are all things that I want to know, right? And that American company, unfortunately, does not tell you, or at least they didn't at the time that I was doing my research. So I went with a cheaper, it just happened to be cheaper, but I went with a cheaper SMITTYBILT bolt-in roll cage. Guys, if you've ever heard me in other videos talk about SMITTYBILT, you know, I don't want to badmouth any of the Jeep companies out there, and I'm not badmouthing SMITTYBILT. SMITTYBILT makes cheap stuff. They make stuff for the budget-minded person who's not going to go out and thrash their parts on a trail on the weekend and put them through lots of different abuse. With that said, their materials are usually not quite as good. The build quality is not quite as good, and the powder coating, if you can even call it that, is downright awful. So I was kind of expecting the powder coating to be awful, but the thing that convinced me to give SMITTYBILT a try was upon my research, I found some photos of vehicles that had the SMITTYBILT bolt-in roll cage that had rolled over, as well as the other American company, and they both actually survived fairly well. In fact, I saw a couple of one was like a half video, but it was terribly shot. The other one was a photo, and apparently the Jeep had rolled a number of times, and it survived fairly well. And that was enough for me to buy something, especially if it was going to be temporary. Well, let me tell you, upon unboxing this thing, and as you're going to see in just a minute, I don't think I'm ever going to take it out. I don't think I'm ever going to remove it and do a weld-in roll cage. I still have full use of my interior. I can add on parts if I want to for harnesses and things like that from the other company. You know, there's really no reason for me to do it. Now, I don't plan on ever rolling my Jeep over. But let's face it, guys, we don't put on seat belts because we plan on getting a car accident. It is just a safety precaution in case we're there. And to that point, where we're going to start is at the front of the Jeep. The factory cage has a huge weakness on Jeeps, and they made it a little bit better with the JLs, but the JKs are downright awful, and before the JKs, they were even worse. Let's go check that out. Now, as you can see behind me, this is what is called the A-pillar. The A-pillar on a Jeep is not big. Let's check it out first. Now guys, this piece of steel going up the side of the windshield here, and obviously the door, if I had a door on it, would make it better. But that piece of steel right there is the A-pillar. That's all it is. That piece of steel that's going up the side of your windshield, it's fairly strong, but it's just sheet metal. It's certainly not meant to take the weight of your vehicle on top of it. So obviously having this post here that comes up on the inside, attaches to the factory bar running to the back, and then surrounds your windshield, makes the whole stiffness, makes the whole thing in the front, the whole structure much more rigid and gives it much more support. Now again, there are some weak points to this. It's certainly not as strong as a full Weldon cage that actually extends the tubing from here all the way down in toward the floor of the Jeep. This doesn't do that, but it's certainly better than what was there factory, right? And that's kind of what I was going for. This one though has basically some thick plate steel that comes down, and then it attaches down there in the door frame or in the door jamb to some other thick steel. So again, a lot more structure. I've seen photos of Jeeps. You can do your own research. I'm not going to throw other people's disasters up in my video, but you can see that they held up fairly well. They also have grab handles, which are awesome. And anybody that has a Jeep, especially with a lift, the grab handles are top of the screen. There is the Windshield Surround Bar. Now that bar actually comes off the factory side piece here that I painted red and removed the fabric and the padding off of. And it goes across the top of the windshield and connects on the other side in the same spot. Now that bar is angled back just slightly, if you can tell over here in this corner, and that's so that you actually have room for your sun visors and stuff, so it doesn't affect those at all. It doesn't come back far enough to where I feel like I would ever hit my head on it, and if you were afraid of that, they do come with really nice quality padding, actually. Now, another concern about these roll cages, and they look cool and everybody's focused on them though, is that dash bar. The dash bar in these cages, now all the cages are going to have them. It really doesn't actually affect your view at all, because from my point of view, sitting in the Jeep, I have a high lift mounted on my hood, and it basically just blocks the high lift. It doesn't really take anything away from my view if I'm sitting in the front seat. You can see, I mean, I can still see the hood over it if I put the phone where my head would be. So, you know, it doesn't really affect anything. And like I said, that surrounding your windshield just makes the entire thing so much stronger and so much more stiff and rigid. But to wrap this up and make it quick, we have these two pieces of tubing extending to the back. We have it attaching on the B-pillar support in the middle, which is the factory structure. I just removed my padding and stuff off of it. Now, I did have to trim out a little bit out of this piece here for your speaker surround bar, just so it would lay flat and tuck in a little nicer. But then it extends back and attaches in the back through the factory holes with grade 8 bolts. Up here on top of this B-pillar, these are factory holes, but you do have to drill them out just a tiny bit in order to fit these bolts through it. Everything ties in really nice. The only other weakness, before we talk at the end of the video about why I specifically chose this cage, is the fact that there is no C-pillar. There's no C-pillar on a factory Jeep. There's on the Jeep cage. There are C-pillar supports on the aftermarket Weldon cages, which are, again, much stronger. But there's no C-pillar on even the bolt-in style cages. But that American company, Rock Hard 4x4, they actually make a C-pillar bolt-in style that attaches to the vehicle. And it actually, this is the Rock Hard 4x4 clamp, which is basically just a circular tube clamp, and it's cut on this side. There's another seam directly on the other side, and it has 6 bolts, 3 on this side, 3 on the other side, and that's what clamp it and hold it together. Now, believe it or not, the SMITTYBILT cage clamps are much, much, much stronger. They have a much higher shear strength, which is why I went with the SMITTYBILT cage. But I figure, again, there's no C-pillar support at all. So I used some of the factory padding that I didn't use in other parts of the SMITTYBILT cage. It fit around the Rock Hard 4x4 cage. It protects my rear seat passengers from hitting their head on it in the event of an accident. And it gives it that structure in the back of the Jeep as well. So aside from knowing what this SMITTYBILT cage is actually made out of, I did not care for the powder coating. I shouldn't say that. I didn't care about the powder coating. When I bought this cage, I fully intended on sanding it down and repainting it red to match everything else on my rig anyway. But it almost hurt me to shave it down, to sand it down and repaint it, because the powder coating on this cage was unbelievable. It was great. It looked like I had stripped off whatever SMITTYBILT puts on their cages, sent it out, had someone professionally powder coat it, and got it back. It was smooth. It was like a satin black finish. And let me tell you, as someone who works with metal, I know what good welds look like, and I know what nice, heavy, thick steel feels like. And I will tell you guys that working with metal and welding, I was super impressed with the level of quality in this SMITTYBILT cage. I've had other SMITTYBILT parts. I've seen other SMITTYBILT parts. You know, there were SMITTYBILT things that were on my Jeep when I bought it. I have SMITTYBILT skid plates. The powder coating is awful on those, but again, it's on the bottom of my Jeep. I scratch them. I really don't care. But the steel is thick, even on those skid plates. That's why I bought them. They offer a great level of protection at a very cheap price. Well, this SMITTYBILT cage does the exact same thing. It offers way more protection than the factory cage does. Again, not as much protection as a Weldon cage, of course, but I don't really ever plan on rolling my Jeep. And in the event that I do, I wanted more protection than what the factory cage allotted me. And because of the quality of this cage, I really truly don't know that I'm ever going to replace it. I'll never say never. Maybe I will eventually, but I am certainly in no hurry, and I am in much less of a hurry than I was before I bought it and when this was originally my plan, and I thought I was going to get that typical SMITTYBILT build quality. So guys, the one last thing, and I'm going to try to show you here as best I can. You saw the clamp in the back of the Jeep, and that's the clamp that Rock Hard 4x4 uses. And they're not weak, but I'd like it to be a little bit stronger, especially when it's supporting you in a rollover event. So aside from knowing what this cage was made out of, the clamps that they use in the front of this cage up on top of your windshield are much stronger. They have the same style clamp on the inside piece of the tubing. Let me flip you around here and show you. So they have the same style clamp here, where it's basically just a half circle that wraps around. There's a seam on the bottom and a seam on the top, just like you saw on the C-pillar support. But where it changes is on the other side. So on this side of the rig, you can see that we have the 3 bolts, just like we did on the Rock Hard. There's 3 on the bottom, 3 on the top. But you'll notice there's an additional bolt this way going straight up, and then there's another one on the other piece on top coming straight down. So instead of this side of the tubing actually being a half circle, it's actually a quarter circle. And there's 2 of those. So when you put them together, it makes that half circle just like it did on the rear, but you're tying them to each other with those bolts that go straight up and straight down, as well as the 3 across the bottom and the 3 across the top. And it provides a way higher shear point. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's an engineer, and we were talking about the different strength in the clamps, because obviously with a bolt-in cage, that's kind of the concern, is the strength of those clamps. I mean, the tubing is tubing, the welds are good, but when it's fully welded, it's a lot different than having it clamped in. And these clamps are way stronger than the other ones, so that's why I went with this style cage from SMITTYBILT. Now guys, before I let this go, anybody that's watched any of my videos or participated on my Instagram page at WarpaintJKU, you know that I am very active in all the comments on my pages. Forgive me, okay, if I am a little bit more absent when it comes to comments on this video, and I will tell you why. There is a lot of criticism that I get in my videos, and most of it's good, and even the stuff that isn't good, I don't think people mean it to be that way. I think they're just trying to help and give their input, but it's a lot to take when it's coming from, you know, dozens of people and from different directions, and they're even saying things that are kind of conflicting. They say the opposite of each other, and I like to expand my mind and think about it, and I'm open to suggestions and things like that. I am by no means an expert with all of these things. I'm just trying to spread some knowledge to maybe more people that maybe don't have quite as much. As I've said in this video probably a dozen times, yes, I know a Weldon cage is much stronger. We get it. I understand it. We get it, okay? I know SMITTYBILT typically does not have the highest quality of stuff. We get it, all right? But this cage, I will tell you, is not typical SMITTYBILT quality stuff. The welds are awesome. As someone who welds, they are great on my particular cage. Maybe you bought one from SMITTYBILT and it wasn't as good, but all I can talk to is this particular SMITTYBILT cage. It is way stronger than what the factory Jeep comes with, which is all I was looking for, especially in maybe a temporary fashion. And in fact, like I said, it was so strong that I'm thinking it's going to be a lot more temporary than I was originally thinking. So there you have it, guys. You ever see me out on the trail? Come over, say hi, you know, let's go wheel. A lot more stuff coming in the future. I got a lot of plans. Get over, follow that Instagram page, subscribe there, and subscribe here, guys, because the subscribers here, you know, this channel is really growing, and this is the this is something I'd really like to do and continue doing this for people. Jeep related fabrication stuff. I've built a lot of things, and you know, I just don't have the time to necessarily do it all at this point in my life, but that's coming. There are big changes happening, and we're going to jump in here. So so subscribe, tell your friends, share the channel. Let's get it going so that we can you know, support this so I can keep doing it. And that's it, guys. Get out there, build your Jeep, wheel your Jeep, and have some fun. Be safe.